Hey folks, my name's Ed Travers. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Gwe. Yesterday, I prepared, like I always do on the first day of each week, a video about our collect of the week. Well, this past weekend here in Canada, we celebrated Thanksgiving. And after I did the video, which was based on a really beautiful prayer, I just couldn't release it. I couldn't release it. It wasn't mean, it wasn't ugly, but it struck me as tone deaf. It struck me that maybe I was missing an opportunity. Because yesterday in the US was Indigenous Peoples Day. We just, again here in Canada, we just celebrated Orange Shirt Day, Truth and Reconciliation Day, Treaty Day. We had a beautiful weekend of learning about and celebrating our Indigenous peoples. Monumental, moving, wonderful, beautiful, life-giving, enlightening weekend. After I'd finished that video, after I had done my edits, after I had rendered it and was getting ready to upload it, do you know the thought that kept popping in my brain, the image that kept popping in my brain? It was that image that I used to color when I was an elementary school student. In the early 80s, sitting in class, the teachers would always give us these pages to color, or maybe cut out sometimes, these crafts to do, these Thanksgiving themed crafts to do. And the image that kept popping into my brain was that one of the pilgrims accepting the gifts of food and the assistance of the Indigenous people. You know the one, right? Mom, dad, little ones are over on one side. Maybe there's a ship in the background off the shore. You can see the village, and then on the other side you see the Indigenous peoples coming forward carrying baskets of fish and fruit and corn and vegetables. And I began asking myself, what happened? Like these images, whether they're fictitious or whether they're factual, these images are meant to represent another time. They were meant to represent that first Thanksgiving when the pilgrims were in dire condition, but the Indigenous peoples came forward and helped them through that harsh winter, beginning with a great feast where everybody came together. Like that is such a beautiful, wonderful picture. Two communities coming together through charity and through love and through the desire to treat the other as a human being, to care for the other, to make sure that the suffering was mitigated. I mean, winters on the East Coast are hard enough, but the Indigenous peoples didn't want to see anybody starve. And so we all came together. Now, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, that isn't really how deep it is. It just goes as deep as to say the Indigenous gave food to the pilgrims to help them survive, and that's pretty much it. But as I began thinking about that moment leading to this moment and asking myself what happened, why are we in the place that we are in, I thought, in that picture, who was being Christ? It was the Indigenous peoples who were acting as the Messiah in that moment. They were the ones coming forward and offering of their own. They had no idea what kind of winter it would be, but they still took from their stores to make sure that other people had something, that other people weren't going to go without. And then as I processed through my fairly limited understanding of history, and I began thinking about, well, from that moment to this one, who acted as Jesus? When the colonizers came forward and began pushing the indigenous peoples further and further and further away, further and further out, when we began taking more and more and more of their property, were we acting as Christ? Were we acting as Christ when we began putting their children in schools in order to destroy the culture, to educate the Indian out of them? Were we being Jesus in that moment? Were we being Jesus when we placed them on reservations, entire communities of people, families on reservations, so that they could so small that they could no longer support themselves in their traditional ways, or we took away their knowledge of their traditional ways and forced them to do things our way, according to our rules, according to our laws? Were we being Jesus? Were we being Christ-like when we treat the indigenous peoples of our lands with scorn, with anger, frustration, hatred? When we heap stereotype after stereotype after stereotype after stereotype upon them? What happened? If those pictures are to be believed, it all started beautifully and wonderfully. It started with a wonderful, Christ-like approach to the stranger. It started with a wonderful offering and sacrifice from those who had to those who didn't. It started with a beautiful gesture of love and trust and charity. It started with a recognition that these newcomers are humans, that they are a creation of God. And it ended with today, where those people that were helped, those recipients of that love and of that charity and of that kindness, of that sacrifice, took and took and took and took and took. You know, this space between our reality today and the myth of what that picture offers us should be a source of great grief for us as a nation here in Canada. It should be a great source of grief for us, that we can recognize that this space between didn't need to be this way. That it was because of the systems and the structures that we put in place that led us to being divided along lines of cultures and colors. That space between that idyllic moment and our reality today offers us an understanding, I believe, of a gap that, should we choose to, we can bridge. Because regardless of whether or not that picture that I colored as a small child is a factual image or a fictitious mythological image, it is a beautiful image, and it is one that we can work towards. So long as we can get it through our heads that doing things the way we've always done them did not work. That we need to change directions. We need to change the path that we're walking. We need to reevaluate these relationships, the strength of these relationships, and work to strengthen them, work to improve them, change directions, change paths, back around so that we become partners, true partners in the sharing of all that we have, because Lord knows we have enough to go around. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters knew that truth on the first Thanksgiving. There is enough to go around. We were the ones who refused to accept that truth as part of the offering of that day. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that we can work together to bridge the gap between our reality and that beautiful image of people coming together. I pray that we will all come to a deep understanding of that great truth, that there is enough for everyone, and that it is okay, it is safe to share what we have with the other. Amen. Numultus.